Again. Yay, okay, hopefully we are taking video for Raymond and Marta and Meredith, who is ill. Okay, this is going to be a real interesting video. Wow, I'm going to be a YouTube sensation. Okay, so first of all, would everybody be so good as to speak just like more loudly than you are accustomed, perhaps, unless you're accustomed to speak really loudly and then don't. But if it doesn't come out very well, we did the best we could. First of all, I believe you have papers for me. So why don't you give me those? And I have papers for you. So I have Meredith's. I will keep Meredith's. Ruth, why do you have papers for everybody? Like, sure, you can give me the questions if you want, because I can't ever remember what they are. So if you have something to give me, go ahead and give it to me. And I don't know why I don't. Did I give some of you papers back last week? Oh, well, 2 weeks ago. Did you give me paper 2 weeks ago? Yeah,
no, I gave you
obviously I don't know what's going on. Oh, here's plans. But did I not have?
No, I just gave it to you. We didn't give them last time.
Oh, okay. So I'm not crazy. Oh.
Yeah,
And here's, okay,
too.
here, yeah. No, here's Raymond and Marta's, and Tom's. Okay. They were stuck to the paper clip of the one in front.
You could ask me about this, so.
Oh, okay.
Mine too.
Okay, give me your paper. It's not anything nefarious. All right. Sometimes it's just easier to explain in person than it is to write here. So on Ruth's, I vaguely remember this. Okay, ask me about this. Okay, do you mind me reading it out loud? Okay, so this is Ruth's sentence. Lilliput and Brobdingnag treated Gulliver in similar ways, but also used some different ways. There's nothing grammatically wrong with this, but it just, something about it strikes me as off. Treated Gulliver in similar ways, but also used some different ways. Does anybody but me feel like that's just not quite?
It's like repeated, but it's not the same thing.
Yeah, in similar ways and different ways. I think maybe it's the repetition of ways. I'm trying to think of how we might say the same thing in a more pleasing, aesthetically pleasing way. Lilliput and Brobdingnag treated, well, first of all, maybe part of what's bothering me is it's not Lilliput and Brobdingnag treated him, but the people of those places. The people of Lilliput and Brobdingnag treated Gulliver in similar ways, but, and then I feel like we do need to change, instead of saying the same, like Alondra said, saying it the same way, but they also occasionally differed in the way they treated him, or something like that. I just didn't know. I'm not really telling you it's wrong, because it's not grammatically wrong, but there's just something in the sound of the way you just repeated the same form of it that struck me as off. Okay, let's see what. Oh, calm down. Okay, so I'm going to read Tina's. Can I just read the sentence? I'm not going to read your whole paper. He is, okay, she's talking about Gulliver and Lilliput. He is chained to the side of a temple. And later, although they had seen his friendliness and complacency, required him to take an oath that imposes on him many obligations and restrictions that he must observe or submit to in order to regain his liberty, or at least his liberty in the respect of his restraints, but not his entire person, who was still subjected to being their servant. Okay, I so know what you mean.
Yeah.
You mean he regained his liberty, but you want to specify, okay, he's not physically restrained anymore, but he doesn't totally have his liberty because he still has to do whatever they say. But my question for you is that distinction important enough to warrant a lengthy, somewhat convoluted sentence? I think as you hear it read aloud, you hear what I'm saying. I'm thinking of what your teacher at Blackhawk would say.
Yeah.
Do you know what I mean? Like you'd probably say, oh, yeah, either eliminate that information entirely or maybe put it in a different sentence. Although he was freed from physical bonds, he was still tied by bounds of having to serve them, or serve the whims of the emperor or something like that. Something that you did here, in at least his liberty in the respect of his restraints, several people, and I don't even know if it was in here or one of my other classes, said things like in respect to or in terms of. These are words that you can just ditch. Like they just never add anything to it. We know it's in terms of that or concerning that. You can just put about or,
What if you're hitting a word countdown?
See, that's the dirty little secret that teachers know you're doing. They aren't fooled. But I don't give you a word count, do I, Alondra? So.
But in other classes.
You all did a really good job. Overall, your papers are good. I'm pretty much always pleased with what you guys give me. And you did what I asked you to do. You compared his experiences in the two places. I read half the papers and I thought, why do they just keep talking about Lilliput and Brobdingnag before I recalled that I wasn't reading the paper that I just collected from you, that I was like, why does nobody want to talk about the other two places? What is up with these people? And then I thought, oh, yeah, that's all they dread. So, I will hold on to Raymond and Marta and Meredith's papers if you ever see this video. You spent some time with William Blake. You spent a lot of time, maybe 2 weeks. But I should have said, did everyone have a nice break? Did anyone play in the snow?
No.
It was a little early.
Baseball.
No. Not unless you were
No,
throwing
it wasn't.
snowballs
No.
instead of baseballs. Yeah, that would be an awkward baseball game.
Yeah.
Or any sport. Football, they play that in the snow sometimes, but soccer would also be an awkward.
Wait, with the snow as the ball? Wait.
Yeah, no, I don't think he played with snow as the ball.
No,
But I think if you whacked that thing,
It would explode.
it was a really good ice ball. So can I borrow someone's William Blake? Yes,
Oh.
thank you. All right, so we did anybody decide they want to choose one of these poems to memorize? Yay!
Yeah, that would be fun.
Yes. Did you see the contrast? This is such Songs of Innocence. This is such a gentle, lovely poem, I feel like. And then the tiger is fierce, but not threatening exactly, but something you want to have healthy respect for, right? And then we had London, and I see that Tina has written next to it, experience. I am going to read London out loud. I wander through each chartered street, near where the chartered Thames doth flow, and mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice, in every ban, the mind-forged manacles I hear. How the chimney sweeper's cry every blackening church appalls, and the hapless soldier's sigh runs in blood down palace walls. But most through midnight streets I hear how the youthful harlot's curse blasts the newborn infant's tear and blights with plagues the marriage hearse. This is not a happy poem. London is not a good place in this poem. I don't know, I mean, we've met figures of speech before this, but that last stanza, and that blights with plagues the marriage hearse. What does that do to you? How do you feel? The juxtaposition of a funeral and a wedding. Is it disturbing to anyone but me? Like that's, you have crying children and sighing soldiers and marks of weakness, marks of woe. Did you hear how he used the same word over and over again, but it doesn't seem awkward? And mark in every face I meet, marks of weakness, marks of woe. In every cry of every man, in every infant's cry of fear, in every voice. Over and over. It's the same thing over and over on every street. The sadness. It's really different than the Lamb. There was a group of poets, and William Blake is one of them. He's the forerunner. But the guy you're going to read this week, William Wordsworth, was in with these guys. They're romantic poets. That does not mean they write about romance or love. But let's go back to Descartes for a minute. Remember his whole people are machines, and if we attack every problem scientifically, we'll find an answer. If we attack every problem like it's a geometry proof, we'll find a problem, or we'll find a solution. Not remembering that not every problem is solvable like that, right? And then Gulliver, think about the Royal Society and his crazy projectors on Laputa and how they're going to solve all these problems with their stupid projects. Science was big, right? Scientists were revered. Ben Franklin, right? Who, in his circle of scientists that he hung out with. I mean, we forget that, because it's kind of the whole kite key thing. We kind of, it's like a joke, or it's a kiddie book thing. But his experiments in electricity were legitimately furthering science. Like, he made discoveries. He was highly respected as a scientist. But there was a backlash. You know, whenever society goes one direction, there's kind of a backlash, and people tend to go the other way. That's why I think, sometimes you elect one party, and then the next group elects the other party, and then they get tired of that party, and then they switch back and elect the other party. And there started to be a backlash against this whole science thing. What were you going to say, Thomas?
Is that Charles Dickens, a romantic author? Like, a lot of this stuff, like, I can't think of it. It's the one with the grad crimes, or like.
Is that Hard Times?
Hard Times, yeah. I read that, and it seemed very romantic.
Yes. He is, to a certain extent, because he's obviously much more concerned about the individual person than he is about grand schemes.
Mm-hmm.
He's about the individual.
Yeah.
But these romantic poets here, and this is maybe 50 to 70 years before Dickens. Okay.
Oh.
Okay, so like turn of the century, 1800s,
Right.
late 1700s. There was this backlash, and poets started saying, you know what? All this whole man is a machine. Man's not a machine. People are complicated. You can't treat humanity like that. And there's questions that we have to ask that aren't able to be answered like a geometrical proof. And they started celebrating nature in particular, like descriptions of nature and descriptions of individual people. So you see his description of nature in the lamb and the tiger, and his concern with people in London. That London is not getting better and better because we're becoming more and more technologically advanced and scientific. Not for the average person, not for the poor, not for the people who are suffering under the load of life. Does that make sense? And so for a few weeks we're going to be looking at poets, and you're going to see they're not theological. When they are theological, sometimes they're not very dogmatically correct. Okay, they weren't necessarily completely consistent in their Christian thoughts. We get theology from William Blake, don't we? He is called by thy name, for he calls himself a lamb. He is meek and he is mild. He became a little child. I, a child, and now a lamb, we are called by his name. So we have a reference to God. The tiger references God. The whole thing. He asks, what immortal hand or eye could frame thy fearful, we say symmetry, but back then it was symmetry. They rhymed. And he asked, who made thee? Did he smile his work to see? Did he who made the lamb make thee? Did that innocent creature come from the same hands that this very, very alarming, threatening creature came from? So it's not certainly deep theology like John Donne, who was asking these deep questions, or George Herbert. It's more, okay, God's a creator, there's a supreme being, more of a deistic God. I'll give this back to you, Tina. So this week, we just have 2 short poems by William Wordsworth. She dwelt among untrodden ways. I love this one. It's very personal. We talk about 2 things, personal and celebration of nature. And the world is too much with us is a I'm trying to think of it, like a pushback, a slapback, a refusal of the idea that all this technology is good, that it's just going to make us better and better. Yeah, there should be the right amount. I saved 3 out for Raymond and Marta. Here, I will email them to them. Okay. I also have for you, I should have given you these last week. One of the families that I teach with on Wednesdays found these at a library. This is the entire text of the Constitution, but it also has the Declaration of Independence in the back. And I could have just given this to you, but I didn't realize until I was looking through it that it had a declaration. But it's got the entire text of the Constitution in it for next week with all the amendments. So, that is for you.
Thank you.
Why do I not have the right number for? Okay. Should have 3 left over. So, let's talk about the Declaration. Had any of you never read it before, or I guess I should. You never read
I
it.
had read parts of it, but never all of it together.
I
I
sent
didn't
you.
realize it was so short.
It is really short.
I
I
thought it would
always.
be longer.
What?
I thought it would
Yeah.
be longer.
And I told you, it's almost all a list of the abuses, right? Did everybody get or use that document I sent out to you that had sort of an updated, the thing that Tina's got? Did everybody notice that I sent you that?
I just read it out of the book.
Okay. I emailed it out to everybody, which is fine. You should still have an email, or I just found this online. I Googled. I wanted to know what specifically all those abuses were referring to, because he's a little general. Jefferson is a little general about some of them, and I want to know specifically what act or anything. And so I emailed out to everybody one of those. Maybe I should re-email it. So my Wednesday students had already read Gulliver's Travels, so I made them read John Locke's Second Treatise on Government. You can thank me later. You didn't have to read that. But interestingly, he uses the phrase twice in his treatise, a long train of abuses. Word for word, a long train of abuses. And here we see in the Declaration of Independence, that he says, at the very bottom of page 35 of this little book. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, all right, that's what they saw. Now, somebody fill me in. We talked about this a little bit last week. What was England doing that the colonists felt so strongly was bad?
They weren't getting representation.
They were getting representations, but what were they getting?
Taxes.
They were getting taxes. Why was England suddenly asking the colonists to pay all these taxes on things? Something had happened in their history. Something expensive that they thought the colonies ought to pay for or help pay for. War.
Yeah.
The French and Indian War. In the 1750s? Because the 1760s is when they started the stamp tax and all of that. George Washington was a young man and fought in the French and Indian War. And it cost money. England sent over soldiers, and they provided them with weapons and helped them. Like, you ought to have to pay some of it. It doesn't seem unreasonable, but the rule was that the colonists could collect their own taxes. The colonies had their own legislatures. Now, some of them were charters held from the king, some of them were charters granted to an individual person, but they had their own legislatures, and they were allowed to raise their own taxes because they were represented in their colonial legislature. They were like, no, we will tax this, that, and everything. And it actually wasn't exorbitant taxes they were asking. Sometimes we think, oh, they were taxing them so horribly. They really weren't. It was the principle of the thing. But those of you who had class with me last year, and even Ruth and Adriana, you'll remember talking about the Magna Carta and horrible King John after King Richard the Lionhearted died, and he was abusing his privilege as king. And they set down certain things that are rights that Englishmen have. And that was in 1215. That was 500 years old at this point. They're like, no, there are certain rights that Englishmen have, and one of them is not to be taxed without our consent in Parliament or wherever. They weren't asking their consent. And so it wasn't so much, we don't want to pay, we don't like the way you're going about it. But then it did turn into other things when they started quartering soldiers. Can you imagine if a group of soldiers just knocked on your door and they said, we're going to live here for a while? Whether you like it or not, they could do that. That would be very, very disturbing. So, the Declaration starts out, when in the course of human events, it becomes necessary for one people to dissolve the political bands which have connected them with another, and to assume among the powers of the earth the separate and equal station to which the laws of nature and nature's God entitle them. A decent respect to the opinions of mankind requires that they should declare the causes which impel them to the separation. If we're going to do something like this, we ought to declare to the world why we're doing it. Now, does anybody remember Thomas Paine, towards the end of Common Sense, he gave some reasons why splitting from England will be advantageous to them. And some of his reasons are in regards to other countries. Does anybody remember what I'm driving at?
That France would help them fight if it were to get rid of
Yes, yes. Is that what you were going to say? Yeah. Other countries won't help them as long as they are part of another country, because it's sort of like a civil war, an internal squabble. But if we're our own country, other countries will help us fight, especially countries that aren't particularly friendly to England in general, or France. So we're going to show you why we have to do this. We're going to make sure all our bases are covered. You know, that nobody says, oh, those rotten Americans, how dare they rebel against their government? No, we've got a reason. In other words, after you read our reasons, maybe you can help us. We hold these truths to be self-evident. It's obvious that all men are created equal, that they are endowed by their Creator with certain unalienable rights. Do you know what unalienable means?
So you can't get rid of them and just look at different parts maybe?
Yeah, you can't turn them over to someone else. They belong to you no matter what. They can't be given away. And among these are life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. John Locke, in that treatise that I made my other students read, said life, liberty, and property. And by property he meant everything, including your very self. I mean, that would be your life as well, but life, liberty, and the pursuit of happiness. That to secure these rights, governments are instituted among men. So why do we have government?
Secure those rights.
To secure those rights. To preserve our life, liberty, and pursue happiness. Deriving their just powers from the consent of the governed. Who puts governments in charge?
The people.
The people. That whenever any form of government becomes destructive of these ends, it is the right of the people to alter or to abolish it, and to institute new government, laying its foundation on such principles and organizing its powers in such form as to them shall seem most likely to effect their safety and happiness. Now, this aforementioned document of John Locke, which had been written about 80 years before this, was written in defense of booting out. Do you remember James II was that Catholic king, and they booted him out, and they asked his daughter to come marry, and her husband William, and they just put them on the throne. But they just got rid of their king. They didn't chop off his head, fortunately, this time. They just got rid of him and turned the kingdom over. John Locke was their spokesman. It's like, why are you allowed to do that? Here's why we're allowed to do that. Because if government becomes destructive of the ends for which we instituted it, we get to get another government. This is exactly what they're saying here. Thomas Jefferson knew his John Locke. He's saying, I mean, can you imagine this happening in the Middle Ages? Like, the peasants just rising up and saying, the king is not governing in a way that promotes our safety and happiness, and we think we should just set up a new kind of government. That would never happen. Well, why not?
Because they just didn't know. I don't know. They just didn't think about. They only were focused. I think maybe they were only focused on what. I don't know.
No, I like where you're going. I think I know where you're
Focused
going.
on their life. It just wasn't something out. Like you wouldn't think about it.
It wasn't a concern of
Yeah,
the
it
average
wasn't.
person.
Yeah.
Like those are lofty matters, too high for me. Why? What is another reason? Like, why did they think kings got to be kings?
Divine right.
Divine right. God made them king. So you don't question it, right? Or it's like questioning God.
And you probably get slaughtered by the knights.
You probably would have no chance. But this is a completely new world here, where 180 years before this, we have this man saying, no, government exists by us, through us, for us. And if we have a monarch that's not doing it the way we think it should be done, we can put a new one in charge. And now we have this group of people saying, yeah, you know, we could set up a whole new government if we want to. And they're going to. It's astounding. We're used to, I mean, it's old news for us, and we're used to it, living in a country that was founded that way. It's mind-blowing. Okay. Prudence, indeed, will dictate that governments long established should not be changed for light and transient causes. You don't want to overthrow the government because they did some little paltry thing you didn't like. Because instituting a new government is a lot of trouble and hassle and can bring a lot of problems with it. You don't do it lightly. And accordingly, all experience hath shown that mankind are more disposed to suffer, while evils are sufferable, than to right themselves by abolishing the forms to which they are accustomed. Hamlet says, we rather bear those ills we have than fly to those we know not of. Generally, you know. But when a long train of abuses and usurpations, pursuing invariably the same object, evinces a design to reduce them under absolute despotism. Everything England is doing all joins together with one aim: to crush us. It is their right, it is their duty to throw off such government and to provide new guards for their future security. Such has been the patient sufferance of these colonies, and such is now the necessity which constrains them to alter their former systems of government. The history of the present King of Great Britain is a history of repeated injuries and usurpations, all having in direct object the establishment of an absolute tyranny over these states. To prove this, let facts be submitted to a candid world. And now we have most of the document, right? Which is a list of how many on that document I sent you, Tina? Do you still have it in front of you? How many, because it numbers them. 20 something? Oh, do they not?
It doesn't.
Oh, okay. It doesn't start over the numbers again? Oh, okay. Don't worry about it then.
So 29.
29 abuses. Sometimes referring to specific taxes, for cutting off our trade with all parts of the world, for quartering large bodies of armed troops among us, for transporting us beyond the seas to be tried for pretended offenses. You know, they had courts in the colonies, but they were shipping people back to Great Britain to be tried in a hostile environment. I'm trying to pick out just some. Plundered our seas, ravaged our coasts, burnt our towns, destroyed the lives of our people. Remember, obviously you know this is July 4th, 1776. In April of 75 was Lexington and Concord. It's been over a year that this has been going on. Over a year since colonists were fired on by British soldiers, saying they're killing us. They're killing us. He has constrained our fellow citizens taken captive on the high seas to bear arms against their country, to become the executioners of their friends and brethren, or to fall themselves by their hands. They used to capture American colonists on sea and just impress them into the British military to fight against America. So after listing this, they say, in every stage of these oppressions, we have petitioned for redress in the most humble terms. Our repeated petitions have been answered only by repeated injury. A prince whose character is thus marked by every act which may define a tyrant is unfit to be the ruler of a free people. nor have we been wanting in attentions to our British brethren. We have warned them from time to time of attempts by their legislature to extend an unwarrantable jurisdiction over us. We've directed ourselves to Parliament, not only King but Parliament, our British brothers. We have reminded them of the circumstances of our immigration and settlement here. We have appealed to their native justice and magnanimity, and we have conjured them by the ties of our common kindred to disavow these usurpations, which would inevitably interrupt our connections and correspondence. They too have been deaf to the voice of justice and of consanguinity, being family. We must therefore acquiesce in the necessity which denounces our separation, and hold them as we hold the rest of mankind, enemies in war, in peace, friends. We therefore, the representatives of the United States of America in General Congress assembled, appealing to the Supreme Judge of the world for the rectitude of our intentions, do, in the name and by the authority of the good people of these colonies, solemnly publish and declare that these united colonies are and of a right ought to be free and independent states, that they are absolved from all allegiance to the British Crown, and that all political connection between them and the state of Great Britain is and ought to be totally dissolved, and that as free and independent states they have full power to levy war, conclude peace, contract alliances, like we hope the French will come help us, and Spain, and establish commerce, and do all other acts and things which independent states may of right do. And for this support of this declaration, with a firm reliance on the protection of divine providence, we mutually pledge to each other our lives, our fortunes, and our sacred honor. And then we have the list of signers, each of which was, oh, I guess we don't have the list of signers. Oh, I guess it was, the Constitution would be the list of signers. Obviously Thomas Jefferson was the main writer. Everybody who agreed and signed this became a traitor, and they would be executed if caught. They were all in. You seem like you want to say something.
Yeah, what did the Spanish do? Like, were they involved at all?
I feel like the Spanish gave us some weaponry, but I think that mostly because of Schoolhouse Rock, and not because of anything I've read.
Oh, okay.
You know, from France. The shot, it's the one, the shot heard around the world one. Yeah, like guns from France and Spain. And then I could see the little men in France and Spain going, yay, raw! You all think I'm crazy. I'm not making it up. I don't know. France, a lot of aid, obviously. Spain was never into it really deep with England, you know, anti-England. That can be your assignment, Thomas. You can look into the connection of Spain with the...
Did you ever find out about the purple goldfish?
I did. I sent, oh, see, you're not getting my emails. I sent out an email about that too. Did anybody get that? That I found there were species of goldfish that were all different colors.
I'll have to see then.
You can probably just go into your spam file.
I don't know. I'll just try again.
Or maybe it's going to your mom.
Maybe.
Yeah, because that's
Maybe.
what happens at times.
Oh, okay. And if they don't share it, all right.
Sometimes they read it and then it's like not till later that they see it.
Oh, okay, yes. Well, if I don't have your personal email, you can have your mom give it to me, but I think I can have all of yours. Do you have an email?
She
I
didn't.
have an email of them that
But she just doesn't.
Oh, okay.
It's,
Then it wouldn't do me any good to send things there. If you get things from me, you can say, Adriana, read this. Don't say it in that tone of voice, though. I don't know why I said it. Read this. Why would you say it like that? Okay, so leading up to that fateful decision of being independent, we read Mr. Thomas Paine. And he was obviously of the opinion that we need to take this step as soon as possible. I don't know if you're, where you read it, if your copy has dates. It says that the first edition of this was in January or February of '76, okay? And first of all, did you all find Thomas Paine easy to follow? He's just very organized, isn't he?
It was really interesting. I had a hard time with the reading questions. I felt like some of it was confusing just for different
Okay.
things, but it was very interesting.
I wrote a paper. I can't see the clock when I sit here.
It was 12:03.
Okay, we're supposed to be done at 12:45. Okay, we're good. I brought a paper, a excerpt from Aristotle's Rhetoric. Great. I'm actually going to sit and read this to all of you. Because Thomas Paine was really a master of communication. And the weird thing is, we don't know how he got to be so, because as far as we know, he didn't have much of an education. He just must have been a natural, as they say. And I feel like he does all three things that Aristotle recommends doing in speeches. The three elements of persuasion. So if I should just read this, or no, I'm going to intro it. Okay. One is called, in Greek, ethos. You get the word ethics or ethical. It means disposing your audience to feel a certain way about you, like you're a good sort. You wouldn't lie to them. You're trustworthy. Another is appeal to logos, which is the Greek word used for the word. In the beginning was the word, and it means reason, logical arguments. And the third is pathos, stirring up emotions. All right, think about those three things working in concert. I'm a good guy, and here are my reasons, and by golly, we ought to do this. Let's all get fired up. So I just thought it would be interesting to look at what Aristotle has to say about rhetoric, and then look at Thomas Paine, like how brilliant he was. Rhetoric may be defined as the faculty of observing in any given case the available means of persuasion. I'll read the whole thing. This is not a function of any other art. Every other art can instruct or persuade about its own particular subject matter. For instance, medicine about what is healthy or unhealthy, geometry about the properties of magnitudes, arithmetic about numbers, and the same is true of the other arts and sciences. But rhetoric we look upon as the power of observing the means of persuasion on almost any subject presented to us. And that is why we must say that in its technical character, it is not concerned with any special or definite class of subjects. Of the modes of persuasion, some belong strictly to the art of rhetoric and some do not. By the latter, the ones that do not, I mean such things as are not supplied by the speaker, but are there at the outset: witnesses, evidence given under torture, written contracts, and so on. By the former, means of persuasion that really have to do with rhetoric, I mean such as we ourselves construct by means of the principles of rhetoric. The one kind has merely to be used, the other has to be invented. Of the modes of persuasion furnished by the spoken word, there are three kinds. The first kind depends on the personal character of the speaker. The second on putting the audience into a certain frame of mind. The third on the proof, or apparent proof, provided by the words of the speech itself. Persuasion is achieved by the speaker's personal character when the speech is so spoken as to make us think him credible. We believe good men more fully and more readily than others. This is true generally, whatever the question is, and absolutely true where exact certainty is impossible and opinions are divided. This kind of persuasion, like the others, should be achieved by what the speaker says, not by what people think of his character before he begins to speak. Okay, I'm skipping down to where it says secondly. Secondly, persuasion may come through the hearers when the speech stirs their emotions. Our judgments when we are pleased and friendly are not the same as when we are pained and hostile. It is towards producing these effects, as we maintain, that present-day writers on rhetoric direct the whole of their efforts. Then skipping another sentence down. Thirdly, persuasion is effected through the speech itself, when we have proved a truth or an apparent truth by means of the persuasive arguments suitable to the case in question. All right, and then he just finishes off by saying, anyone who can do these three things will be able to persuade anyone of just about anything. Yeah, and Tina's got a look on her face, because that can be good or bad, depending on whether your point is good or bad. So here's my first question for you. How does Thomas Paine make us trust him? How does he come across as a trustworthy, friendly sort?
Well, first, usually if I'm able to follow the logic and like kind of figure it out for myself, or like or it seems like I can figure it out for myself, then I assume that it's true, and then that makes me obviously that I'm like, oh, he's telling the truth.
Okay.
And then the second thing was he kept being very nice about it. Like he kept saying, like, I'm not trying to offend anyone. This is just the truth. Which then,
Yeah, he didn't call the British those dirty, rotten so-and-sos. And he didn't call names. Does anybody else notice anything else that he does? And I'm going to do a hint here. Well, you tell me yours first.
It's not that much, but doesn't he like kind of like, you know how when we used like in papers for last year, you had to kind of like put like the opposite of what you were like to try to like
The refutation
the
part.
reputation.
Mhm.
It's the opposite, and then you're like, no, wait a minute, like this is like you kind of like just flip it, and then you're,
Mhm.
is it? I felt like he did in like a part. I don't know.
He did. He said, there are people who say we shouldn't split. Here is their reasoning, but let me show you why their reasoning is faulty. He definitely did that. One thing, I mentioned this very briefly at the end of last week. He had only lived in the colonies for 14 months when he wrote this. Yet, he continually says we and us. I am one of you. We are in this together. Even though, I suppose 14 months is long enough to establish residency somewhere, but you know what I mean? It's not like he has grown up under these abuses for years. He's a newcomer to the colonies, frankly, basically a newcomer. But I'm one of you. This is our problem. We can fix this problem. You notice the difference between saying you need to do this and we can do this? It's just a small difference, but it really makes a difference in the way you feel about the person speaking, doesn't it? Not to separate yourself. So I noticed that after I had thought of connecting this Aristotle quote. But yeah, he always says we. He always says us. Even though people say, Mr. Paine, you just, you've been here barely a year. Yes, but I'm one of you. Now, Thomas said that one thing that made him trustworthy was the fact that his reasoning seemed very plain, like not like he's being tricky, not like, it's just very open, it's common sense, right? Which is why he called the book that I'm giving you plain, simple. In fact, he even says that, I think, at the beginning. Okay. May it's at the end, because I feel like it was either a beginning or a wrap up, where he says, I'm not saying anything tricky, I'm just speaking plain old straight up common sense. Well, we'll work through this a little bit as we go through the questions, and I'll see if I can find it. And then in certain places he breaks into exclamations that I want to read some of here. The first question I gave you, what is Thomas Paine's opinion of government? Why do we have to have a government?
Like restraints, defenses,
Because we're what?
we're upon.
Yeah, because we're wicked and we're sinful, and unless we're restrained in some way. If everybody was just allowed to do whatever they wanted, it wouldn't be good. He says, society is produced by our wants. In other words, we live together in a society because we can all help each other. Government by our wickedness. Society in every state is a blessing, but government, even in its best state, is but a necessary evil. And then he says this, and oh my goodness, this man is a poet. Government, like dress, is the badge of lost innocence. The palaces of kings are built on the ruins of the bowers of paradise, on the ruins of the Garden of Eden. The only reason we need governments and palaces and kings is because of the fall. He's got me hooked. You know, we talked about the introductions where you're supposed to hook your reader in. I'm in. Next question. Why is a simple government better than a complex one? What?
Do you want us to answer?
I want you to answer.
Oh, because it's like easier to find the problems that are in it and to fix it.
Yeah. He says the more simple anything is, the less liable it is to be disordered. And the more, and as Tina said, the more likely it is that we can find the imperfection and remove it. Then he critiques, as he does sprinkle throughout here, the English system of government. The Constitution of England is so exceedingly complex that the nation may suffer for years together without being able to discover in which part the fault lies. Some will say in one and some in another, and every political physician will advise a different medicine. Simple government, simple is best. Do you consider our government simple? Like our current government? Do you think there's ever times when there's problems in our government but people aren't sure exactly where the fault lies? Maybe as not being voters yet, maybe that doesn't mean you don't follow politics. But we're going to read the Constitution this coming week. It's amazingly short. Again, well, I just handed it to you, right? That little booklet is the entire Constitution with all the amendments and the Declaration. It's actually fairly simple, but we have conglomerated things onto it, you know, things that it runs and does. I wonder if Thomas Paine would consider our government simple now. Okay. The next question is, well, let me, if you notice that common sense is divided basically into 4 parts. The first part, I don't know if what you read had headings in the 4 parts. Mine says, of the origin and design of government in general, with concise remarks on the English Constitution. So his first section is, what is government? Why does it exist? And how does the English government meet my standards and the standards to which government should aspire? Second one is on monarchy. And I asked you, what is Thomas Paine's opinion of monarchy in general? Yeah, I don't think you can say strongly enough. He thinks it's just for idiots. Only idiots have kings.
Yeah, I thought he was almost over, then he went into hereditary succession. I'm like, oh, we're still going.
Yeah, we're still going. I noticed this was interesting. He says, in the early ages of the world, according to the scripture chronology, there were no kings. The consequence of which was, there were no wars. Okay, has anybody studied logic? Have you done like syllogisms in 3 lines? Okay. Well, even if you haven't, I bet you can see the missing part of this. There were no kings, so there were no wars. What's the missing link in his logic? I mean,
Kings create wars.
kings create wars. Wars would never happen except for kings. I don't know, do we agree? Are we going to agree with him?
No.
I don't feel like I agree with him. He kind of slipped it in there. You know what I mean? No, there were no kings. There were no wars. He doesn't flat out say kings cause, I think that's a little suspicious there. He says, how impious is the title of sacred majesty applied to a worm who in the midst of his splendor is crumbling into dust? That seems to be a little bit of an emotional appeal to me, using terms like worms crumbling into dust. Yes. He spends the entire second part of Common Sense disparaging monarchy, and he uses a specific example. The Israelites. They asked for a king. God wasn't happy. Oh, it's another syllogism with a missing thing. The Israelites asked for a king, and God wasn't happy. Therefore, God is always unhappy if anyone chooses to have a monarchy. Again, I don't know. The Israelites were a special case, right? They were a chosen people set aside by God. Doesn't necessarily say that God disapproves of monarchy, but he kind of. Do you feel less happy about his arguments, or his arguments for breaking away specifically from England are still good, but maybe questionable about his hatred of monarchy. Remember, he lived for 40 years in England.
Yeah.
Might be. I wonder what happened to him. Yes. See if there's any other gems of. Yeah, he goes on for many pages about the Israelites. To the evil of monarchy, Paine was talking about, we have added that of hereditary succession. The first, monarchy, is a degradation and lessening of ourselves. And the second, hereditary succession, is an insult and imposition on posterity. In other words, we've signed up to one family. All your descendants are going to rule us. Your descendants can rule my descendants. What? He says, hereditary succession in the early ages of monarchy could not take place as a matter of claim, but as of something casual or complemental. It's a compliment to say, I want your son to be king. But as few or no records were extant in those days, and traditionary history is stuffed with fables, it was very easy after the lapse of a few generations to trump up some superstitious tale, conveniently timed, Muhammad-like, to cram hereditary rights down the throats of the vulgar. Here's his hereditary rights from William the Conqueror. A French bastard landing with an armed banditti and establishing himself King of England against the consent of the natives is in plain terms a very paltry, rascally original. Really, really doesn't like hereditary monarchy. Okay, moving on. Now he has thoughts on the present state of American affairs. And I just found my sentence. In the following pages I offer nothing more than simple facts, plain arguments, and common sense. All I'm giving you. And I asked you to list some of the ways, this is Yolanda's refutation, that it has been claimed that America benefited from its connection with Great Britain. And since I've taken your papers away, you don't know what you answered me. Does anybody remember? Somebody who's saying, oh, we can't break from Great Britain. Look what they've done for us. What's an example of something they've done for us? They've protected us. Okay. French and Indian War, most recently.
Didn't they say that like the colonies were connected to Britain?
Yes, yes. So here I've numbered mine in my book. That first of all, America has flourished under her connection with Great Britain. Look how great the colonies have become. His answer? Yeah, she'd be just as good if she wasn't connected and probably better off. But she has protected us. Ooh, here's his answer to that. That she hath engrossed us is true, made us wealthy, and defended the continent at our expense as well as her own is admitted. And she would have defended Turkey from the same motives, for the sake of trade and dominion. She doesn't do it because she loves us. She doesn't do it because we're her children. She gets something out of it. Yes, then the one you just mentioned, that the colonies are only related to each other through Britain. Like siblings. You know, think about that though. If they're like siblings through a parent, doesn't that mean if your parents die, you have no relationship with your siblings anymore? He says, it's a roundabout way of proving relationship, but it's the nearest and only way of proving enemyship. In other words, everybody who's an enemy to Great Britain, France, Spain, whoever, they're automatically our enemies right now. They wouldn't be if we weren't part of England. But Great Britain is the parent country, say some, and more shame upon her conduct. Even brutes do not devour their young, nor savages make war upon their families.
And doesn't he like say that they're not like people from everywhere? Like
He does. He has several answers to that, and he says, yes, we are from all over the world. He says, not 1/3 of the inhabitants, even of this province, are of English descent. Wherefore I reprobate the phrase of parent or mother country applied to England only, as being false, selfish, narrow, and ungenerous. But even if we all were of English descent, what does it amount to? Nothing. Britain, being now an open enemy, extinguishes every other name and title. The first king of England of the present line, William the Conqueror, was a Frenchman, and half the peers of England are descendants from the same country. Wherefore, by the same method of reasoning, England ought to be governed by France. And then France would be their parent country. Next, but much has been said of the united strength of Britain and the colonies. We might bid defiance to the world. Together we can do anything, if we just stick together. And he says, this is mere presumption. The fate of war is uncertain. Besides, what have we to do with setting the world at defiance? Our plan is commerce, and let the world take care of itself. I like the way he's very organized. I like reading Thomas Paine. It's easy to follow. Now, some of the injuries and disadvantages. Anybody remember any of those that you wrote down on your?
That they're enemies with France and Spain, I think that was.
Okay, yeah. Everybody who's an enemy to England is going to be automatically our enemies. But if we were our own country, they wouldn't be. We could negotiate our own peace. Does anybody remember any more?
the king would still just make all their laws and just
Yeah. And he goes on in this later in the book, what is making up the quarrel going to look like? They've shot us already. They're using soldiers against their own people here. How are we going to fix that? Okay, so that one we talked about. This is an interesting paragraph. Everything that is right or natural pleads for separation. The blood of the slain, the weeping voice of nature cries, "'Tis time to part." Okay, I think we've ventured away from logical argument now, and we're in the weeping voice of nature cries, "It's time to part." Even the distance at which the Almighty hath placed England and America is a strong and natural proof that the authority of the one over the other was never the design of heaven. If God wanted England to rule America, he would have put them closer together. But he didn't. There you go. The time, likewise, at which the continent was discovered adds weight to the argument, and the manner in which it was peopled increases the force of it. The Reformation was preceded by the discovery of America, as if the Almighty graciously meant to open a sanctuary to the persecuted in future years, when home should afford neither friendship nor safety. This is all in God's plan. Look how people were escaping religious persecution at the very time when they found this new place to live. But he put it so far away that it's obviously not the intent of God that it always be ruled. Now, why not reconcile? He goes on to that. These are the people he thinks are recommending reconciliation. Interested men who are not to be trusted. And people who will gain by reconciling. Weak men who cannot see. Prejudiced men who will not see. And a certain set of moderate men who think better of the European world than it deserves. But we'll just go back and everything will be okay. It'll be like it was before. And England did good things for us, and they will again. Now, he decides not to confute this with his logical argument, and he goes onto his emotion. Listen to this. But let our imaginations transport us for a few moments to Boston. That seat of wretchedness will teach us wisdom and instruct us to renounce a power in whom we can have no trust. The inhabitants of that unfortunate city, who but a few months ago were in ease and affluence, have now no other alternative than to stay and starve or turn out and beg. He goes on. Men of passive tempers look somewhat lightly over the offenses of Britain, still hoping for the best, and are apt to call out, "Come, come, we shall be friends again for all this." But examine the passions and feelings of mankind. Bring the doctrine of reconciliation to the touchstone of nature. Then tell me whether you can hereafter love, honor, and faithfully serve the power that hath carried fire and sword into your land. If you cannot do all these, then you are only deceiving yourselves, and by your delay bringing ruin upon your posterity. Your future connection with Britain, whom you can neither love nor honor, will be forced and unnatural, and being formed only on the plan of present convenience, will in a little time fall into a relapse more wretched than the first. But if you say, "You can still pass the violations over, I can forgive," then I ask, hath your house been burnt? Hath your property been destroyed before your face? Are your wife and children destitute of a bed to lie on or bread to live on? Have you lost a parent or a child by their hands, and yourself the ruined and wretched survivor? If you have not, then you are not a judge of those who have. But if you have, and can still shake hands with the murderers, then you are unworthy of the name of husband, father, friend, or lover, and whatever may be your rank or title in life, you have the heart of a coward and the spirit of a sycophant, which means someone who just kisses up to someone else to get what you want. Well, it would be very difficult to confute that, because it's not really a logical argument, is it? But it's not a bad argument. You want to forgive England. Well, is your house still standing? Did they kill your son? No, I don't know how I'd feel if they had done that. I'm not living in Lexington or Concord or Boston. Who is the King of America? whoever's paper I have on top has two possible.
Oh,
The law is king. I do not know where I found that. Okay, there's more on if we reconcile. Oh my, which I'm not going to go into. Okay, gives his plan. Oh, yes. Oh, yeah, there's two answers here.
God, right?
Yes, where, say some, is the King of America? I'll tell you, friend, he reigns above, and doth not make havoc of mankind, like the royal brute of Britain. But let it be brought forth and placed on the divine law, the word of God. Let a crown be placed thereon, by which the world may know that so far as we approve of monarchy, that in America the law is king. For as in absolute governments the king is law, so in free countries the law ought to be king, and there ought to be no other. Everyone beneath it, including our rulers, right? Including our rulers. Then he has some miscellaneous reflections in this last part. He has a long section adding up how much it would cost them to make a fleet, which was kind of boring, but actually there were people, well, we can never fight Britain. Look at the British fleet. They blew out the Spanish Armada 200 years ago. They're the terror of the seas, the British fleet. Do you remember what point? It was a really good point that he made about fighting the British fleet.
like their entire fleet is dispersed around the world to hold.
Yeah,
everything.
they've got an empire around the world.
And they have to travel so far to even.
Yeah,
And
we
they're
don't
counting
need.
ships they don't even have to.
Yeah, we don't have to have as many ships as they have, or men, because they're busy in other places. They're going to bring their entire forces over here. We can do this. We can do this. And he says, we can borrow from other countries, which we did. You know, after declaring independence. Borrow money, borrow ships, borrow weapons. Borrow from France. They're waiting to help us. Just a second. He points out that we're at the right time. Like, notice how he talks so many times about the time is ripe. It's right now we have to do it. He says we have just enough people, but not too many. You know, we have just enough people to fight, but not so many that will suffer horrible hardship from lack of food, you know, as we fight. He says we're right in the middle. We still have people alive who fought in the French and Indian Wars. We've got seasoned soldiers, veterans, but if we wait another 20, 40 years, we won't. Now is the time to do it. And he finishes off with his list of this last question. Why should we declare independence? First, other countries will come in and help us. As long as we are belonging to England, we're rebels. But if we're a free country, we're not anymore. And he says, considering we just read the manifesto, it says, were a manifesto to be published and dispatched to foreign courts, setting forth the miseries we have endured, and the peaceful methods which we have ineffectually used for redress, declaring at the same time that not being able any longer to live happily or safely under the cruel disposition of the British court, we had been driven to the necessity of breaking off all connection with her. At the same time assuring all such courts of our peaceable disposition towards them, and our desire of entering into trade with them. Such a memorial would produce more good effects to this continent than if a ship were freighted with petitions to Britain. Which is exactly what we did, right? They produced a Declaration of Independence, Senate nationwide, to say why they have to do this and to make the other nations favorably disposed. Do do you find Thomas Paine persuasive? Would you like to go against him in debate?
No.
No, I don't feel like I would either. He was persuasive. I told you last week that they say that maybe in 3 months 120,000 copies of Common Sense was circulated. By in a year 500,000. It did not take a year, however, for them to declare independence, just a few months after this. I can't help but point this out also, and I'm sure that if you've had the television on at all, you have experienced political advertising and commercials, and just sort of the pathetic state of reasoning. Do you know? Like, there was one last night, and you can just read a heart. I don't even, like, she's Iowa. I'm not even in the running to vote for her. But I just noticed there's a commercial, and it's all like text messages on a phone. Has anybody seen this political commercial? Well, you're not missing anything. It's all just stupid text, like people are having a texting conversation. And I turned to my husband and I said, this is just the most juvenile thing I've ever seen. Like, really, we're campaigning for people to make the laws of our country, and we're reduced to advertising like they're two people texting each other with emojis and stuff. Like, that's just not, it just looks stupid.
Yeah.
Compared to reading something like that, you know, a persuasive piece of political propaganda, but propaganda isn't necessarily, I mean, we usually use it as a bad term, but it means, you know, disseminating an idea. He's a master at disseminating the idea he wanted to. He did a very good job at it, but in an intelligent way, and the lack of intelligence disturbs me more than evil in politics or something. I just hate the fact that they all seem so stupid. That wasn't a very good thing to say about our leaders, but you know what I mean. That debate and argument have sunk so low. Okay, speaking of sinking low compared to the heights, this next week I'm going to ask you to read some tough stuff. All right? Alondra's like,
Where's Raymond to grow?
why would she do that? Why would she say that to us? All that was in that look right there.
Is it like Descartes?
No. Well, no, I don't think so.
Well,
You said
that was
well.
Okay, so what happened? You guys probably know this. You're getting the crash course of American history, but you know, our choices are like doing a survey and learning a little bit and then digging in a little deeper into some things, and I prefer to dig in deeper. So you all know, I presume, that we won the Revolutionary War. We are not any longer, in fact, colony of England. Hope that wasn't a spoiler. And that for many years, we had something called the Articles of Confederation. So it was a document that loosely connected all the colonies with each other, but really didn't give any power for one colony over another. So, like while we were fighting the war, if George Washington said we need money, then each state now, not a colony anymore, could in its own legislature vote money, but there was no higher power to make it do so. All right? When the war was over, we owed debts to France and possibly Spain. We're not sure about Spain. And we had no power that could force the states to raise money to pay it back. So we started, some people felt like we started looking really bad in the eyes of the world, like deadbeat country that just doesn't pay back its debts and doesn't get anything done because, you know, like you're all states and I come to you asking you for contributions. Like, oh, we'll think about that. Don't you think we ought to pass this law? Well, I don't know, we'll think about that. And maybe you'll agree and maybe you won't, but in the meantime, nothing gets done. And so, in 1787, they decided to send representatives to another General Congress to decide to kind of beef up connection between the states to give it a little more oomph. And instead of beefing it up, they wrote an entirely new constitution. They did not tell people they were writing a new constitution, but they did. And then they released it, and the rule, as is written in the Constitution, is that 9 of the states had to ratify it. And when they did, everything would become law, and it would be our new form of government. The first thing I'm going to ask you to read is the Constitution. Right? It's not long. Most of it, I mean, there's a few antiquated sounding phrases, but it's mostly pretty easy. Also, by the way, you don't, if you're writing down homework, you don't actually have to, because I have a homework sheet, like with all the things you're going to read. Yeah. Now, the individual state legislatures were then going to vote. Do we want this new constitution thing to be the real deal law for us, or do we want to reject it? So the fight was on in each state, okay? And a lot of people were terrified of it because they thought it made the federal government way too strong. It's like it's way too many powers outside the states. Don't like it at all. You adopt this, states are going to end up being nothing. And the federal government's going to be everything. You just see. Governments like this always turn into tyrants. You just wait and see. Other people were saying, wait a minute, we can't live like this anymore. And all these things you're afraid of, let me show you why you shouldn't be afraid of them, okay? So a series of speeches and newspaper articles on both sides were released. On the pro-Constitution side, there was a group of men called the Federalists, Alexander Hamilton and James Madison and John Jay. They wrote a bunch of articles, they were newspaper articles, that were printed in New York, trying to convince the New York people to recommend to their legislature to ratify the Constitution. So those are called the Federalist Papers because they are pro-federalist government. Another group of documents is known as the Anti-Federalist Papers. They were the people who thought this new Constitution was going to ruin us. Patrick Henry, you know, give me liberty or give me death, Mr. Patrick Henry. He was an anti-federalist. He thought this was very dangerous. I am not going to have you read all of the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers because that would A, take a really long time, and B, not be very interesting. But I'm going to have you read some selected ones. And what I have done is, go ahead and pass this around. Should have 3 for the people who aren't here. I have made a reading guide, sort of. So, because some of the Federalist Papers are longer than others, you know, and some parts of the Constitution are longer than others. And so, this is based on a 4-day reading plan. Like, assuming you're not going to read anything today, and then you're going to do Wednesday, Thursday, Friday, Monday, and you're not going to do anything over the weekend. Now, obviously, if you read on Saturday or on Sunday, you can go slowly. I hesitate to tell you this, there's no way we're going to be able to talk about all this next week. So, technically, if you didn't get through all of it, we're probably still going to be working our way through it. But do the best you can, alright? Because we're going to start reading Tale of Two Cities after this, and you're only going to have read the first fourth of A Tale of Two Cities. I hate to just talk about a fourth of a book, you know what I mean? So it is my goal that we're probably going to spend a couple of weeks talking about this, but remember, if you don't read it all this week, you also have Tale of Two Cities reading after that, if that, you know, makes sense. I would say start, you know, on day 1 and read the day 1 readings, and then if it's obvious you're not going to get through them all this week, go ahead and at least just finish reading the Constitution. That won't take long, it's just that little booklet, you know, and then read through the Federalist and Anti-Federalist Papers. These are all free online. Alright, I will try to send links. I actually need to go to the library so I can email stuff to Raymond and Marta and Meredith this afternoon. And I will try to find them all and just send you a link so you can just click on it. Here's Federalist 15, you know. here's Patrick Henry's speech from, June 5th, 1788. So do the best you can, but I'd rather you didn't finish them all this week, but read with care, all right, than you just zip through. And here's all I'm asking you to do. Make a list of the writer's argument for or against adopting the Constitution. Don't write down every point, but just broad ideas. So one thing the Anti-Federalists were worried about is the states losing their power. Like, that's all you have to write down. The states might not be so powerful. Does that make sense? Or one Federalist point, apparently a lot of the Anti-Federalists were saying our country is too big for a government like this. We can't ever, get federal laws out everywhere. Of course, they didn't know about telegraphs and phones and computers and things to come. And so the Federalists are combating that. And just write down their points. Don't worry. Roads keep getting better. That was one of their arguments. And will be easy. Travel will be easier, and we can get these laws passed around. Do the best you can to pick out their argument, like in a sentence. Like, oh, he says our country will look bad, if they don't pay their debts. That's a reason to adopt it.
So
I've given you some
to
of them
write
already.
the arguments, the anti.
Of everybody, yes. Of every single one of these. So 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7. But don't write like a whole page of argument. Just jot down a few. Oh, he seems to be very concerned about this. He seems to be very concerned about that. Does that make sense? Just like you did for the books, yeah. I thought it was better than answering specific questions, and then you have to find the arguments. The nice thing about, especially the Federalist Papers, they're also very organized. This is Alexander Hamilton and James Madison. These guys are organized, all right? It's not hard to follow their arguments because they're so doggone organized, okay? So if you start, you're getting through half the week, and like, I'm never going to read all these. Okay, I'm just going to sit down and finish the rest of the Constitution, because we are going to talk about the whole Constitution next week. But I can't imagine we're going to get through all the other stuff. All right, are we good? Oh, blast.
You're writing?
What?
Oh.
I forgot to tell you what your writing assignment
Yeah,
was.
your writing assignment.
Okay, so, okay. Little lamb who made thee, dost thou know who made thee? Right? That's not da-da, 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 iambic. It's the opposite. Little lamb who made thee. You hear it's da-da, da-da, da-da. Tiger, tiger, burning bright. And then there's an extra one at the end. In the forests of the night. It's the opposite of iambic. It's called trochaic. 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 It's da-da, da-da, da-da. See if you can write a few lines of trochaic, like a poem. Notice like tiger, tiger, burning, that only has 3, and then bright. Little lamb who made thee. Apparently, William Blake liked trochaic trimeter. That's what that would be called. 3 feet. I don't care how many feet you do. It doesn't have to be pentameter or trimeter or anything. Just see if you can write a few lines and da-da, da-da. If you try your very best, you can do a great... I don't know. A great job. That would be a spondee. Don't stay up all night to write the poem. It would be trochaic. Just do your best. All right? Even if it's not like a fully rhyming poem, see if you can write a few lines. But use William Blake as your guide. Da-da, da-da, da-da. But sometimes he has an extra da on the end. Tiger, tiger, burning, bright. It's just hanging out there. Sometimes he doesn't. Little lamb who made thee. The raven. Once upon a midnight dreary, while I pondered weak and weary. That's trochaic. Right? Give it a shot. Adriana, you're looking a little stunned. Okay, just ran over you with something. Okay. But if you could come up with like like 4 lines that rhyme with each other in some way. Doesn't have to be long. Not a sonnet. I'm not asking for anything crazy. Just experiment and use William Blake as your guide. And now you may go, and goodbye to Marta and Raymond and Meredith